Okay, this is a review of Chapter 9, LGBTQ Relationships, Families, and Parenting for Intro to LGBTQ Studies. Okay, so what is a relationship? A relationship can refer to a variety of different types of social interactions. Relationships which are deep, close relationships between two or more people are the ones that we're kind of referring to for this, such as a friendship, couple, marriage, and so we're talk about varying different kinds of relationships and the way that even our understandings of relationships are incredibly influenced by the social culture of heteronormativity. So when it comes to queer resistance, some same-sex relationships that with or without children follow the expectations of monogamy and relationship exclusivity, while other relationships stray from traditional norms, like platonic parenting, polyamorous relationships, or even multi-parent families. Queering expectations about families can result in judgment and discrimination, but it can also be a source of strength, like freedom, creativity, and setting up a family or relationship that's tailor-made to the people that are involved. We'll explore open relationships, while many maintain a strong bias towards monogamy, seeing monogamous relationships as more favorable for providing higher relationship satisfaction and higher sexual satisfaction, though there's been little empirical evidence to prove this. Those ideas may be more the result of how we're all socialized. Monogamous relationships are also seen as more likely to preserve sexual health, but again, people may cheat. And there's no real direct evidence that people in monogamous relationships are practicing safer sex when they are in that relationship with that person or with other people. These biases are reflected in negative media representations and views of mental health providers and politicians. So they're kind of out there in the culture, and it reinforces for us what is considered right and wrong. So in a lot of ways, we internalize the cultural value system, how our relationship should be. When looking at relationship quality, a lot of the existing research looks at comparing same-sex couples to heterosexual couples. And what they found in this research is that all these couples experience similar levels of satisfaction. Though, as we've previously discussed about the minority stress model, LGBTQ individuals face additional stressors, which provide unique challenges for LGBTQ couples and families, as they have to navigate judgment and rejection from their families of origin, or in a variety of systems such as in education, employment, or in religious or faith communities. Another issue is dating violence and divorce, right? So dating violence is higher for LGBTQ teens, and experiencing this issue in your teen years is going to lead to higher likelihoods of violent adult relationships, as well as other risk factors through adulthood. It's complicated to get into all the reasons why. I literally teach an entire class called family violence, so it's hard to kind of boil that down into one snapshot. But as we'll talk about, what kind of training or modeling do we see of what dating should look like is something that's lacking for all couples of all kinds, regardless of, your identities. There isn't a lot of great modeling in the culture of here's what a healthy relationship looks like. And this is even more so when it comes to, not discussing LGBTQ identities or relationships at all. So this provides a lack of consistent and positive role modeling. And when you aren't including representations or models of healthy LGBTQ relationships in sex education curriculum, kids are also not getting that information from their parents or other mentors, which creates a vacuum of information. So there's no clarity on how to negotiate healthy relationships. It's essential to have a more inclusive curriculum with information that includes queer couples and families across the lifespan in kind of a more comprehensive sex education. So we'll talk about that later. Okay, so families. What is a family? Well, there's a wide variety of ways for a family to be. They could be a blended family, a step family, an extended family, nuclear family, as well as many others. So the nuclear family is privileged as the ideal in our culture, regardless of the fact that less than 15% of families are nuclear in design. No matter what the design of the family has certain functions for us, but we tend to the nuclear family is best because it's kind of the most, it's the most difficult to achieve, have that affluence to do so. So families all serve functions. They serve the function to reproduce, right, and provide for children. They teach the next generation social norms that they're going to need to navigate in society. And the functions that are specific to families vary from culture to culture, and of course have changed over time within our own society, which is how we can tell that it's socially constructed. Industrialization has also changed the family. For example, it kind of put a capitalist spin on the family, because now, the idea of a family in this nuclear family model relies on the heteronormative model of a housewife or stay-at-home parent as the support of the family, meaning it relies on someone's domestic unpaid labor. And heteronormativity reinforces the ideal of sexual and romantic monogamy by linking family authenticity to if there's children or not. So a couple is not really considered a family in the same way, even though they definitely are, right? They are a family. They might have pets instead of kids or things like that, but they're often not considered a real family or given the authenticity of a family until children are involved. And there's a ton of social assumptions that are very heteronormative and homophobic that go along with that come with, children. So what are LGBTQ families? Research suggests that definitions of families in the US range broadly, and that sometimes family it goes beyond blood relations, which is the case for fictive kin or for chosen families. So people who are more than friends, they're really more like family. And when it comes to family support and rejection, the family support is incredibly important. So this kind of factor of whether you're experiencing support or acceptance is incredibly important, right? So having that acceptance is a resource for our mental health, right? It affects your self-worth and your optimism. So having family support is a positive. But unfortunately, supportive family is not the reality for all LGBTQ people. Also, there's family stressor. So rejection by family members is one, of your sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression, of course, has negative consequences and can go beyond mental health to also being excluded from family events or being pressured into trying to change or conform. And this can even lead to violence against them for transgressing gender and sexual orientation norms. So family acceptance is very important because it can stand as a buffer to some of the issues that were covered by the minority health model that we talked about before. So instead, of dealing with all of the kind of social stigmas in society, having family support and that greater acceptance leads to less internalized homophobia, higher self-esteem, more social support, and better overall physical or mental health, which also includes less substance use or lower risk of suicide. So PFLAG, as we'll talk about a couple times throughout these lectures, is an organization that tries to deal with the negative outcomes of family rejection, acknowledging that some people grief or shame when a family member comes out, or a fear of being blamed or a fear of being judged by others. So this organization is there to counter the myths and prejudice that families may have and offer ways to foster better relationships and outcome for everyone in the family. People are not excluded. Okay, looking at research with LGBTQ families, there are challenges to research, and the biggest one is to get access to large enough data samples, like enough people to interview or enough people to part of research studies. So discrimination is a barrier to finding these samples, as some people may be hesitant to reveal their identities, especially when it means facing discrimination in family, in work, or within their larger communities. And also, since same-sex marriage has only been nationally legal since 2015, there's not really any long-term research because that's still so new. Another big problem is the exclusionary heteronormative definitions of family that limit the operationalization of the LGBTQ family to those who conform to a more traditional heterosexual model, or suggest that the ideal LGBTQ family are those who conform the most. When it comes to families that don't conform, research often ignores them completely when they're setting up what they're studying and how they're studying it. And this is, unintentionally or or intentionally, but sometimes unintentionally, but they're excluding LGBTQ families from analysis and losing that opportunity to learn about what may be the same, what may be different. Okay, so continuing on with families, LGBTQ-headed families with children are another important analysis point. So becoming parents is important to many people for various reasons. In research with lesbian and gay parents, their motivations to have children were similar to heterosexual parents, except that they might also be motivated by a desire to instill tolerance in their children and create a better, more equitable world in the process, or at least have a small impact on the next generation. Some couples adopt, some use, technologies like in vitro fertilization or hire a surrogate, while others become parents in the context of heterosexual relationships. So, when parents, coming out to their children or their families can be a very, very difficult process. So LGBT people from older generations may have entered relationships with the opposite sex in order to avoid admitting their sexual orientation, or to avoid stigma and to be accepted, or to have children at a time when family building options for LGBT people were unimaginable for many. And so children's initial reactions to their parents coming out can vary from shock, blame, to acceptance and love. And when looking specifically at parents who come out as transgender, they face similar experiences with their children, and the age of a child may influence their reaction to a disclosure. So meaning younger children are more flexible in their thinking and can better adapt than older children to a parent coming out. But for transgender parents, finding support from others who have also experienced coming out to their children can be a difficult resource to find, as research has shown that transgender parents' relationships, though, with their children are better after they disclose, so it is a positive situation. It's just hard when you don't have a community of support to talk to you about your experiences. Also, gay and lesbian step families may have challenges of their own, but we need more research to really know. They have to negotiate if and who they come out to. And some people handle co-parenting in a real supportive way. Other people co-parent in a much more antagonistic way. So it depends on that situation as well. It could be a negative or positive situation to co-parent with a previous partner, depending on the context of that relationship, right? But a big problem within the research is trying to contend with the myths about same-sex parenting and the children in LGBTQ families. So myths have negatively influenced decisions about families in the law and from social service professionals who were affected by discriminatory myths. And some of the common myths are that children will experience disruptions with their gender identity development or in their gender role behaviors if they're raised by same-sex parents. That kids will be gay or lesbian as the result of their parents, which of course doesn't make sense because those people's parents were heterosexual. Anyway, that kids will have more mental health problems or behavioral problems because of having same-sex parents. That kids will have problems in their social relationships or experience more stigma or bullying or teasing. And that kids are more likely to be sexually abused by their parents or their parents' friends if their parents are in a same-sex relationship. All of those are myths. None of them have ever been demonstrated in the research. The result of assuming sexual families are better, that heterosexual families are safer and more supportive. But again, no evidence of that exists empirically. And this leads to psychologist Petersen, whose research challenges negative myths. After more than 2 decades of research, she argues that if we have not found the differences that were assumed to exist between LGBTQ families and heterosexual families, then we're not going to find them. But what research has shown is that the quality of a family relationship is really the most important predictor of healthy child development. Like, do they care about you? Is it a positive relationship? Is more important than the sexual orientation or gender identity of that parent. Okay, when looking at navigating and changing systems and institutions. So some have tried to change systems or institutions from within. And what they found was that some private sector corporations were more open to change than larger government or state institutions. This is because they were afraid to lose customers or employees, anti-LGBTQ sentiment. So some corporations strengthened LGBTQ workplace policies. These mean benefits for partners, non-discrimination policies, and providing gender-neutral bathrooms. So some argue that policies just keep employees happy, which masks other labor violations and exploitive practices, which is a fair argument. And in more recent years, some health and human services agencies have expressed support for allowing same-sex couples to foster and to adopt, kind of combating that discrimination that's coming against LGBTQ families in, kind of gaining access to fostering and adopting. So when looking specifically at challenges with interacting with systems, first, parenting and family building, most states do not have adequate protections to ensure equity for same-sex couples who want to adopt or access fertility treatments. Numerous studies have documented the health and stress impacts of unequal laws on families headed by same-sex couples. These unnecessary hurdles cause stress. The next challenge would be interacting with legal systems. So law impacts lives and decisions, like how to have kids, where to live, to see basically if your family is or is not recognized. So for instance, polyamorous couples who wish to have their entire family recognized and be legally protected face numerous challenges, like only being able to get health coverage, insurance coverage for one partner, as an example. And then another challenge is, interacting with health and human service providers. So same-sex couples experience unequal treatment and often is just not being seen as a legitimate family. And this creates a sort of invisibility that's stressful to the couple, and it can also complicate accessing and receiving adequate health care. We need supportive and affirming policies, practices, and professionals. And this is also true when it comes to the aging LGBTQ population. They are underserved and they experience a higher risk of medical issues. And so couples report anxiety at how they'll be treated by staff. Will they be seen? Will they be heard? Will they be respected? And there's a large fear that if a person's partner is not respected, or maybe their advanced medical directives aren't respected, then that could be a real problem in a situation of a medical emergency. Another challenge is interacting with schools and educators. Some of the challenges, are being treated differently than straight or cisgendered parents and not having their family structure represented in their children's classroom and curriculum. Another challenge is not having both parents respected as equal when decisions about their child is being made. And a different kind of challenge is helping kids explain their family structure to their peers, who are also kids who don't have cultural competency or education to understand differing family forms. To aid in these issues, future teachers need to learn in their college training how they can demonstrate cultural competence when working with LGBTQ families before they enter the classroom. So this needs to be required of anyone graduating into new teaching programs. And that's not enough. You can't say, well, we'll just fix the new teachers. Obviously, support and training needs to be set up for those who are already in the field. But it would be an important landmark to kind of institute from now on. Everyone that graduates to teach needs to know this, right? That could at least transform the next generation of classrooms. Okay, another, when we look at, some of the trends and changes in the legal landscape, some of the recent legal changes and protections have resulted in challenges as well, but also really in the potential to improve the lives of LGBTQ families. So that's, exciting that these changes can be positive changes, right? And when we challenge these systems, there can be more space provided. There can be, more policies and procedures that actually work with and adapt to the needs, the unique needs of LGBTQ families. So when looking at strategies for change, queer cautions and resistance. So this is kind of going back to that assimilation versus, more radical approaches. And so some argue that an assimilationist approach to push for access to heteronormative institution is misguided. Because when you try to join a system that has historically left you out, you're not changing that system as much as just, changing a little bit to provide a protection for that one group. And under the kind of queer umbrella, there are groups who are not privileged through this. And again, Some argue that it's misguided because it's privileging heterosexuality as the thing that everyone should want to aspire to. But then the argument against that too, so there's some great arguments on both sides here, right? Because the argument against that too is that, well, access to things that are assimilationist, like marriage, means resources and benefits like health insurance, property rights, adoption rights, that kind of thing that people had problems with before, where you go into the hospital and they wouldn't acknowledge you as the significant other or to make medical decisions, stuff like that. Obviously, with legal marriage protections comes those kind of rights that were just taken for granted by heterosexuals. So there are great points on both sides of that argument, right? That assimilation has negative consequences that can be long-lasting, but some of those approaches have really offered some in the community more rights and protections, which are also integral.